Did you know that almost 6% of the population qualifies as narcissistic personality disorder, but experts like Dr. Ramani Durvasula estimate that one narcissist can impact 5 to 10 lives at a time. That means millions of people worldwide are quietly trapped in invisible wars they don't even realize they're fighting. And here's the shocking part. Neuroscience shows that your brain can release the same addictive chemicals during a toxic argument as it does when you play slot machines. That's why you keep going back, even when you swear you're done. It's not weakness, it's biology being hijacked. If this resonates with you, even a little, give me a sign. Hit like, share this video, drop a simple thank you in the comments, or subscribe. It changes everything for what comes next. Carl Jung once wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when one of those personalities is not meeting you, but strategically manipulating you? Neuroscientists at the University of Michigan found that humans can read microexpressions in less than 200 milliseconds. Narcissists exploit this faster than you can even think. Before you open your mouth, they are scanning you. They are reading your eyes, your posture, your silence. Freud believed that every gesture hides unconscious motives, and narcissists have perfected the art of using those hidden signals against you. You feel controlled before the conversation even begins. The statistics are brutal. Studies suggest that about 6% of the population meet the clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, but psychologists like Dr. Ramani Durvasula argue the ripple effect is far greater. For every one narcissist, 5 to 10 lives are significantly disrupted, damaged, or reshaped. That means if you've ever felt inexplicably silenced, drained, or manipulated, the odds are high you've already stood on this battlefield. And here lies the paradox. They win not by shouting louder, but by shaping the air of the room, by bending your reality in ways you barely notice until too late. Think of Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations nearly 2,000 years ago, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Narcissists thrive precisely by making you forget this truth. They insert themselves into that gap between perception and response. Jung called it the shadow, the part of yourself you ignore or repress. The narcissist studies this shadow more carefully than you do. They know your insecurities, they sense the hesitation in your voice, they recognize the moment you doubt yourself, and they weaponize it instantly. This is not abstract theory. Modern neuroscience shows that people under social pressure produce higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. Prolonged exposure to narcissistic manipulation keeps cortisol elevated, weakening your immune system, impairing memory, and shrinking the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for learning and resilience. The hidden war is not just psychological, it's biological. Your body pays the price long before you consciously realize you're under attack. But here is where it gets even more unsettling. Narcissists often use silence as a weapon. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Narcissists twist this principle. They provoke you, then punish your reaction. Or they withhold attention, making you desperate to earn back their presence. Neuroscientists call this intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. It is why you keep returning to conversations that leave you feeling empty, why you seek validation from someone who only gives it in doses calculated to keep you dependent. You might be asking yourself, why do I always feel one step behind? Why do I freeze before I even confront them? The answer is both simple and complex. On one hand, narcissists train your nervous system. They create an environment where you are conditioned to anticipate attack or withdrawal. On the other hand, they exploit universal human drives, the need to be seen, valued, acknowledged. Jung insisted that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Narcissists embody this avoidance, projecting their disowned flaws onto you, forcing you to carry the weight of what they refuse to admit. But you are not powerless. The very awareness that this war exists changes everything. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." Recognizing that narcissists manipulate before you speak allows you to reclaim that space. You can slow the reaction. You can anchor yourself in silence, not as a trap, but as a shield. You can remember that their control begins in the unseen, and so must your defense. The truth is that narcissists control you before you speak because they have studied the terrain of human weakness. But by seeing this, you begin to shift the balance. The hidden war is not just theirs to win. It is yours to understand. And once you understand, you can no longer be the same. Carl Jung believed that every person wears a mask, a persona, the face we show the world. But behind that mask lies the shadow, the repressed, denied, and unwanted parts of the self. For most people, this shadow is unconscious but relatively harmless, surfacing in small bursts of jealousy or insecurity. For narcissists, however, the mask and the shadow are their entire existence. Freud once described the ego as a rider trying to control a wild horse, the ID. A narcissist abandons the rider completely. Instead, they polish the saddle and convince you that the chaos beneath them is power. Statistics from the American Psychiatric Association show that narcissistic traits are rising in younger generations, with studies indicating that nearly 1 in 10 millennials displays strong narcissistic tendencies. This is not just cultural commentary, it is neuroscience. MRI scans reveal that individuals with high narcissistic traits show reduced gray matter in the left anterior insula, the part of the brain responsible for empathy. In other words, the mask hides not only insecurity, but a measurable neurological gap. When you sense that something feels inhuman in their coldness, your instincts are not wrong. But the mask works both ways. Jung argued that what irritates us most in others is a mirror of what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. Here lies the trap. The narcissist projects their shadow onto you, but you also project yours onto them. Suddenly, you are not just confronting their manipulation, you are wrestling with your own denial. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and narcissists thrive in that exact territory. They create illusions so convincing that you begin to doubt your own memory, your own logic, even your own identity. The mask is seductive because it feeds the very needs you don't admit. Freud's concept of transference explains why victims often feel inexplicably bound to narcissists. You project past wounds, perhaps a critical parent, a distant partner, an unhealed trauma, onto this new figure. The narcissist senses it and steps perfectly into the role, offering conditional approval that reactivates old scars. Neuroscientists confirm this cycle with studies on dopamine. Intermittent praise from narcissists lights up the same brain pathways as addictive drugs. You are not weak for staying. Your biology is literally hijacked. And yet, beneath the surface, there is a strange paradox. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The narcissist, in a twisted way, forces you to face the very parts of yourself you ignore. They push you into confrontation with your own shadow, though their goal is not your growth but your submission. Still, some survivors later say that relationships with narcissists, while devastating, became turning points in their self-awareness. It is as if the fire they set within you also illuminated a truth you could not otherwise see. The mask of the narcissist is not just arrogance or charm. It is carefully designed armor. They present success, confidence, beauty, or intellect, but behind it lies a fragile self, one terrified of insignificance. Freud described narcissism as a pathological extension of infantile self-love, and that is exactly what the mask conceals. They are children in adult bodies, demanding applause, terrified of exposure, unable to sustain intimacy without collapsing. When Jung said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow," he could have been describing the narcissist's performance. The brighter their charm, the darker the emptiness it hides. The danger is when you confuse the mask for the person. You argue with the mask, you fall in love with the mask, you try to heal the mask. Meanwhile, the real self, buried beneath layers of denial, never shows up. And you, unknowingly, are caught in a play that was scripted long before you arrived. This is why confrontation feels so futile. You are not confronting them, you are confronting the mask they desperately need to survive. But understanding this gives you an unexpected power. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." He was not cynical, he was prepared. Seeing the mask of the narcissist for what it is, an armor over emptiness, allows you to stop expecting authenticity. You stop hoping for transformation they will never choose. You begin to see the shadows not as mysteries, but as evidence. The psychology of shadows teaches us one essential truth. The narcissist's greatest trick is convincing you that their mask is real and your doubts are false. The moment you reverse that equation, when you trust your perception more than their performance, the illusion begins to crumble. And once you see behind the mask, you can never again be deceived by its shine. What actually happens in your brain when you confront a narcissist? The answer is not philosophical, it's physiological. Neuroscientists at Stanford have shown that direct confrontation with a hostile or manipulative person activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, in less than 1/10 of a second. Your heart rate rises, your palms sweat, your blood pressure spikes. It's the classic fight or flight response. Yet narcissists don't share that same surge in empathy or self-doubt. MRI scans reveal their reduced activity in the anterior insula, the region responsible for compassion and emotional resonance. In other words, while your nervous system is burning energy to survive the stress, theirs is calmly calculating their next move. This asymmetry explains why you often walk away feeling drained, while they appear energized. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, a leading researcher on stress, notes that humans are unique in generating stress responses to purely social threats. For you, the possibility of rejection or humiliation feels as dangerous as a predator in the wild. The narcissist, however, interprets confrontation not as danger but as fuel. Real cases in clinical psychology show that narcissists often gain a sense of superiority when challenged. They twist the narrative until your defense becomes their evidence. If you raise your voice, they call you unstable. If you remain calm, they call you cold. Either way, they win the frame. Carl Jung warned that the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. Confronting a narcissist illustrates this perfectly. The confrontation is never about finding truth. It is about maintaining control. Freud described this as secondary gain, the hidden benefits people derive from dysfunction. For the narcissist, the benefit of confrontation is not resolution but domination. And here the science is merciless. Studies in behavioral psychology demonstrate that when individuals are rewarded intermittently, even unpredictably, their engagement skyrockets. That is the engine behind gambling addiction, and behind why people stay entangled with narcissists despite the pain. Confrontation becomes part of the cycle, a gamble where you keep hoping for change, for recognition, for one moment of honesty. Take the real-life case of writer and activist Christopher Hitchens, who often spoke about public debates with powerful personalities. He admitted that the more combative the exchange, the more his opponents thrived on the spectacle rather than the substance. With narcissists, it is the same. They thrive on the performance of conflict. Seneca once wrote, "A quarrel is quickly settled when deserted by one party. There is no battle unless there be two." Neuroscience backs this wisdom. When you disengage, your amygdala gradually calms, cortisol levels drop, and rational thought returns. When you keep fighting, your stress remains elevated, impairing your ability to think clearly. But does that mean you should never confront a narcissist? Not exactly. The science suggests nuance. Clinical psychologist Dr. Carol McBride explains that strategic confrontation, limited, fact-based, and stripped of emotional appeal, can sometimes set boundaries. It is not about changing the narcissist, it is about protecting yourself. In one study, patients trained in assertive communication techniques reported a 40% reduction in stress symptoms when dealing with manipulative personalities. The difference lies in intent. Confrontation to change them almost always fails, but confrontation to protect your integrity can succeed. Still, you must prepare for retaliation. Case studies from family courts reveal how narcissists, when confronted, often escalate by rewriting the story, painting themselves as victims, and mobilizing others against you. This phenomenon, known as narcissistic rage, is well documented. Freud would have called it the eruption of the infantile ego, unable to tolerate the smallest crack in its illusion of superiority. Neuroscience calls it an overactivation of the limbic system. Whatever the label, the result is the same. They explode, not because you are wrong, but because you are right. The lesson from science is sobering but liberating. Confrontation with a narcissist is not a debate, not a trial of facts, not a meeting of equals. It is a neurological mismatch, a psychological trap. Jung said, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." To confront a narcissist wisely means refusing to let your biology be hijacked. It means recognizing that your stress is real, measurable, and dangerous, while their calm is only another mask. It means knowing that the goal is not victory but survival. And perhaps that is the most radical realization. The science of confrontation teaches us that the real battleground is not their mind, it is yours. The more you understand how your brain reacts, the more you can choose when, how, and if to confront. And sometimes the most powerful confrontation is not a battle at all, but but the quiet refusal to play their game. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Now imagine applying this wisdom to a confrontation with a narcissist. The narcissist craves your reaction, thrives on your protest, and feeds on your outrage. Silence, in this context, is not weakness, it is strategy. And neuroscience proves it. Studies on emotional regulation from Harvard University show that when people practice controlled silence in stressful interactions, the brain's prefrontal cortex becomes more active, allowing them to think clearly while the amygdala, the fear center, calms down. In other words, silence restores your power to choose. But silence is not passive. Epictetus, the Stoic slave-turned-philosopher, insisted, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." For a narcissist, your reaction is the prize. If you shout, they call you unstable. If you justify yourself, they call you guilty. If you beg for understanding, they call you weak. Yet when you offer silence, the game changes. They cannot twist what you did not say. They cannot manipulate what you did not reveal. Clinical research on conflict dynamics shows that silence often forces manipulative personalities into exposure. When you no longer provide the fuel of reaction, they overextend themselves, revealing contradictions, lies, and desperation. Carl Jung believed that silence was not emptiness but a container. He described the shadow as a voice that emerges when we stop filling the air with our defenses. In Confronting Narcissists, silence does something extraordinary. It returns you to yourself. While their words aim to invade and destabilize, your silence allows you to anchor. Freud once noted that the unconscious speaks in slips, in pauses, in the words unspoken. Your silence interrupts their theater and makes space for your own unconscious strength to rise. This is not romantic idealism. Real-world case studies confirm the power of silence. In therapy groups for survivors of narcissistic abuse, participants who practiced Gray Rock, responding with minimal, unemotional silence, reported up to 60% lower stress markers compared to those who continued verbal confrontation. Gray Rock does not mean cowardice, it means refusing to provide entertainment. It is the practical translation of Stoic wisdom into modern survival. Yet silence is not always easy. Neuroscience reminds us that humans are wired for social connection. When someone accuses us, our brain's natural response is to defend, to explain, to plead for fairness. But here lies the paradox. Fairness does not exist in the narcissist's world. Seneca once said, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." Choosing silence when every cell in your body demands defense is precisely that, the act of becoming unconquerable. Consider how silence reshapes time itself. When you are silent, the narcissist grows uncomfortable. Seconds feel like minutes to them. Their mask begins to slip. They expect chaos, and you deliver calm. They expect reaction, and you deliver stillness. In this gap, something remarkable happens. The narcissist reveals more than they intend. They miscalculate. They overplay. And you, instead of being dragged into their storm, become the observer of their unraveling. Jung called this holding the tension of the opposites, refusing to collapse into reaction or submission, but instead bearing the weight of silence until truth emerges. Of course, silence is not always the endgame. Sometimes it is a bridge. Marcus Aurelius urged himself daily to return to reason. Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it. Silence is that rock. It allows the storm to pass without eroding you. And from that place of calm, you can decide your next move, not as prey, but as master of your own response. In the hidden war with narcissists, silence is not surrender. It is resistance. It is the refusal to be scripted into their drama. It is the reclaiming of your nervous system, your clarity, your sovereignty. Modern neuroscience, ancient Stoicism, and lived human experience converge on this truth. Silence is power because it interrupts the cycle. It reminds you that while you cannot control their words, you can always control your own. And perhaps the greatest irony is this. When you stop speaking to defend yourself, you begin to hear yourself again. The most dangerous part of being entangled with a narcissist is not the arguments, the manipulation, or even the gaslighting. It is the slow erosion of your sense of self. Carl Jung warned, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Narcissists exploit this exact fear. They chip away at your identity until you begin to live in reaction to them instead of in connection with yourself. Breaking the cycle requires more than walking away. It demands rebuilding the very parts of you they worked so hard to dismantle. Let's start with what science reveals. Neuroscientists studying trauma survivors at Yale found that repeated exposure to psychological manipulation rewires the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-reflection. Victims often report a fog, a loss of clarity, a voice in their head that sounds suspiciously like the narcissist. This is not imagination. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the brain during conflict, shrinking the hippocampus and amplifying the amygdala. The result? You live in survival mode. And survival mode is fertile soil for narcissists, because you are too busy protecting yourself to recognize your own strength. But protection is not just about defense, it's about rediscovery. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Breaking the cycle means reclaiming your thoughts from their grip. Psychologists recommend journaling, not as a cliché, but as a neurological reset. Writing activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, pulling you out of the reactive circuits narcissists thrive on. Survivors who kept daily journals reported a 35% decrease in intrusive thoughts within 3 months. This is not merely coping, it is reprogramming. Still, knowledge alone is not enough. Seneca insisted, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The narcissist thrives on this truth. They make you imagine consequences that never come, threats that never materialize, fears that paralyze you into silence. Breaking the cycle means exposing these illusions to light. Therapy rooted in cognitive behavioral techniques teaches you to test assumptions. When the narcissist says, "You'll never survive without me," the question becomes, where is the proof? Survivors who practiced this reframing discovered that many of their deepest fears were shadows cast by the narcissist's words, not realities they would actually face. There are real cases that prove the power of breaking free. Consider Tina Turner, who endured years of narcissistic and abusive control under Ike Turner. She later said, "I had nothing, no money, no house. But I had myself." Her story illustrates the paradox. Losing everything external sometimes becomes the doorway to regaining your soul. Modern neuroscience echoes this. Post-traumatic growth studies show that nearly 50% of survivors report higher levels of resilience, empathy, and meaning after leaving toxic dynamics. Pain, when faced, does not only destroy, it transforms. Yet here is the hardest truth. You cannot break the cycle by changing the narcissist. Freud believed that neuroses persist because the patient secretly clings to them. Narcissists cling to their illusions with iron fists. No confrontation, no plea, no proof will rewrite their story. The only story you can rewrite is your own. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The narcissist is not your fate. They are the mirror showing you where your unconscious wounds remain unhealed. Break the cycle by healing those wounds, not by fixing theirs. And this requires boundaries. Real, unapologetic boundaries. Clinical psychologist Dr. Henry Cloud argues that boundaries are not walls but gates. They let in what nourishes and block what destroys. Survivors who practice consistent boundaries, not explanations, not negotiations, just firm limits, saw their stress levels drop significantly. Some lost relationships, yes, but they gained themselves. And that gain is priceless. Breaking the cycle without losing your soul means embracing paradox. You must grieve the illusion of who you thought they were, while celebrating the truth of who you are becoming. You must accept that you cannot control their chaos, but you can command your own clarity. You must choose to stop rehearsing the old dialogue in your head and start writing a new script. Marcus Aurelius urged, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Waste no more time arguing with a narcissist about what love should be. Live it for yourself. Because in the end, the cycle ends not when they change, but when you decide to live beyond their reach. And that decision is the birth of your freedom." Carl Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Few experiences test this truth more deeply than surviving a relationship with a narcissist. You carry scars, visible and invisible, from battles that seemed unwinnable. Yet history, psychology, and neuroscience all reveal something extraordinary. Those who emerge from this storm often find themselves forged into a strength they never imagined possible. Pain does not just wound, it awakens. Neuroscience offers proof. Studies on post-traumatic growth from the University of North Carolina show that nearly half of survivors of deep psychological abuse report higher levels of resilience, self-awareness, and even life satisfaction once healing begins. The brain itself adapts. After prolonged stress, the hippocampus, the memory and learning center, can regrow neurons through practices like meditation, exercise, and journaling. What was once damaged can literally be rebuilt. Survivors often describe this phase as getting their mind back, a sense of clarity sharper than before. Science confirms it. The brain, like the soul, is capable of regeneration. Think of Viktor Frankl, who survived the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." The narcissist may never change, but their presence forces you to ask, who do I become now? Some answer by collapsing into bitterness, but others discover courage they never knew they had. It is not about denying the pain, it is about transforming it into a compass. Survivors often become advocates, healers, creators. The very wound becomes the source of mission. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal and corruption within his own court. Yet he wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This Stoic paradox applies perfectly here. The narcissist was the impediment. Their cruelty, their gaslighting, their endless hunger for control. These obstacles can become the path. Instead of breaking you, they break the illusion that you were powerless. They strip you down until you see what cannot be stripped away, your inner will. Freud, despite his flaws, understood one thing clearly. Unresolved trauma repeats itself until it is healed. By choosing to face the pain of narcissistic abuse, you break the repetition. You stop attracting the same cycle. You begin to notice the red flags sooner, to trust your instincts faster, to protect your boundaries fiercely. Jung would call this individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating shadow and light. The narcissist, paradoxically, was the dark teacher who forced you into that path. Real-world stories illuminate this transformation. Oprah Winfrey has spoken openly about escaping abuse and manipulation in her youth, turning that pain into a platform of empowerment for millions. Her life is testimony that what begins in silence and oppression can transform into a voice strong enough to shape culture itself. Neuroscience confirms what stories like hers embody. Resilience is not a rare gift, but a skill the brain can learn, a pattern the soul can practice. And here is the final truth. Transformation beyond narcissism is not about erasing the past. It is about integrating it. You will not forget the sleepless nights, the confusion, the moments you questioned your own sanity. But those memories no longer define you. They instruct you. You become someone who can see manipulation where others are blind. You become someone who can sit in silence without fear. You become someone who no longer confuses chaos with love. This is not just survival, it is evolution. Epictetus told his students, "No man is free who is not master of himself." The narcissist's greatest theft was convincing you that mastery belonged to them. But as you reclaim your voice, your boundaries, your sense of worth, you realize mastery was always yours. They were never the author of your story. They were merely a chapter, and chapters end. So transformation is not a distant dream. It is already happening in the moment you decide to stop reacting and start becoming. The scars remain, but they shine like markers of survival. You stand, not broken but remade, not weak but tempered. And in that strength lies the ultimate reversal. The narcissist's shadow tried to consume you, but instead it revealed your light. Jung was right. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose right now to become.